Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, guys. Nice to see you all again. So, here we are. Live reading. This is the last one. The last one I'll be doing for a little while anyway. I've pretty much gone through all the books. So I started at the beginning and went all the way through 5 books. And as I mentioned before, I'm not going to bother reading from the last book, the acting prequel. It's never been as popular as the other ones, and there's funny bits and stuff, and I obviously put a lot of time and effort into writing it, but I just sort of figured I'd draw a line on it after Shave My Spider. I kind of thought by now the virus would be over, everyone will be out of lockdown, and people will be sick of hearing me waffle on. Well, some of those have come true. I'm pretty sure you're all sick of hearing me waffle on, but unfortunately, nothing much has changed as regards the rest of the world. Here in Australia, we're doing all right though, but just readjusting my screen.
You're wonky.
Super excited.
You're really wonky.
Can't be wonky. So today's reading is from Shave My Spider, and there's this beautiful cover which now is no more. We actually we were digging around, clearing out a bit of space, and we found a whole big box full of paperbacks. At some point I must have thought it was a brilliant idea to order like about 5 or 10 of every one of my books just weeks or possibly months before I completely change all the covers. So they're all sitting there now, and they're in Australia, so they're far too far away from most of the world to actually send anywhere for a reasonable price, but we're sort of stuck with them really. Not sure what I'm going to do with those. But as people have discovered, my books burn pretty good, so if you're ever really desperate, light them up. Anyway, I will crack straight on, and we'll see how far we get. So this is about the last 2 countries, Laos and Cambodia, which were the tail end of our trip around Asia. We still spent most of the month in each of them. They were both slightly curtailed for the sorted reasons, but they weren't quite as eventful as China, for example. So I didn't write quite as much about them. So we've got a little bit from Laos and Cambodia, and then of course the old epilogue just to send you off. So
You don't want to straighten up so that you've got the pretty screen
do you want me
behind
to straighten up? Sorry, what's...
Just turn the thing and come across a bit.
I don't understand what you're asking me to. Rue wants me to turn you around, so I've got the pretty screen, but then I get the door.
That's better. And then you... Yeah, perfect.
There we go. Oh, okay.
Better.
I'm trying to put me in the middle because, it just drives me mad when I look at somebody and they're off centre, but Rue would rather have the screen. So it's prettier, let's face it.
That's perfect.
Anyway, here we go. So, got my book. So we're going to start with Laos. The chapter is called, appropriately enough, Poison Cafe. Laos from China was as different as George Orwell and Robinson Crusoe. Vast swathes of skyscrapers wreathed in smog were replaced by stick huts and undergrowth. The jungle ruled this land and was bent on reclaiming as much as possible. Here and there people had kept it at bay, but tendrils curled around every structure, just waiting for a chance to engulf them once more. The villages we passed through looked positively medieval, disorganised straggles of homemade shacks that clustered around the road as though it might save them from being swallowed by the forest. Quite frankly, it was paradise. Well, I thought it was. There's a lot to be said for the eye of the beholder. I mean, anyone else could have looked out of that bus window and seen a landscape of despair. Torrential rain lashing down from a sky the colour of lead, battered hovels held together with rusty nails and shattered dreams, and all of it drowning in sucking, squelching, splattering mud. But that's exactly what it looked like. But to me, there was something else out there. Fresh air, for starters, which was a novelty by itself. Untamed natural beauty in the kind of quantity you couldn't tame even if you really wanted to. And for us, at least, there was freedom. Poverty, depressing as it was, had not been absent in China. It was just out of sight behind a forest of skyscrapers. Here, the rural people scratched a living much as the peasants did over the border, only it was more obvious because there wasn't any urban sprawl to confuse the issue. Acres of semi-submerged rice paddies gleamed like emeralds whenever the sunlight caught them, which admittedly wasn't much on a day like today, but somehow it all seemed a whole lot more wholesome. I liked Laos immediately, and not only because it wasn't China. The condition of the road, however, was awful, especially considering this was the main and only road to the border. We swerved past potholes big enough to swallow the bus and hugged the cliff for long sections where the edge of the road had crumbled into the abyss. It compared to Chinese freeways like the villages we passed through compared to the centre of Beijing, which is to say, delightfully rustic. Night had fallen by the time we reached Luang Prabang. The outskirts resembled a shanty town, unlit and dilapidated, but we quickly found a tuk-tuk driver to take us from the bus station to our hostel. Liberty turned out to be a cheerful two-storey building with wooden shutters on the windows and a little roof over the gate. We trudged in, dripping, and straight away the brother and sister tag team that ran the place introduced themselves in flawless English. In the few minutes it took us to check in, we heard their life story, shared a couple of jokes, and soaked up a measure of their happiness and positivity. Of Vietnamese nationality, the pair had sunk every penny they'd saved throughout their lives into this guest house, and they were determined to build its reputation. The only downside was the room they'd allocated us. It opened directly off reception, the door only a few feet from the desk that was, they assured us, manned round the clock by one or the other of them. They even took turns in sleeping on a mat beside the desk in case they had a late arrival. "Well, bugger," I said, as we leaned our backpacks in opposite corners of the room. "Bit close for comfort, you mean?" Rue had noticed too. "Yeah, I was sort of hoping, well, you know, naughtiness." "It'll be fine," she said. "Maybe tomorrow we'll ask if they've got something a little more private. Honestly, tonight I don't think I'm capable. I need food, and then I need to collapse." She was right, of course. Neither of us had slept in over 40 hours. I could feel the weariness threatening to overwhelm me at any moment. Even opening my rucksack was a chore. "Would it be okay to go out in these clothes?" I asked. Ruth sniffed herself and made a face like she was going to be sick. "Okay," she said, "but we eat at the first place we see, and we sit as far away from anyone else as we can." Deal. It wasn't perhaps the most auspicious start to a new country, but I felt very good indeed about it. For the last couple of weeks, getting out of China had become such a huge obstacle that it had dominated my thoughts. All my fantasies were focused on nothing more than reaching Laos. It had become the promised land for both of us. Firmly ensconced on the backpacker trail, for better or for worse, food here would be recognisable and edible. Accommodation would be well reviewed and affordable, and more than anything, we'd be back amongst people we could actually communicate with. Hell, we might even get a spot of internet access now and then. Oh yes, Laos would make all our dreams come true. And Luang Prabang, with all its exotic promise, was ripe for exploitation. We would do well here. Or so I thought. As Rue and I dragged our weary bodies out of Liberty Guest House and into the surrounding darkness, we had just one overriding goal: find food as quickly as possible. We were aided in our quest by the fact that Luang Prabang only has one main road, and within minutes we were on it. We headed towards the centre of town and came across a perfectly adequate cafe straight away. Delilah's, it was called. I took this to be an excellent sign. For starters, I could read it, and that boded well for the menus. Sure enough, Delilah's was exactly the kind of place I'd been hoping to find, ever since leaving Vietnam, actually. The menus here were in English, and promised such mouth-watering fare as spaghetti, lasagna, and all-day breakfasts. Something easy, Rue pleaded, so it won't take an hour for them to cook. We settled on pad thai, my personal favourite noodle dish, a meal that can be cooked in less than 3 minutes on a motorbike stall at the side of the road. The kitchen staff knocked it out in fairly short order, and it was delicious. They even served us a free glass of water each while we waited. Now that was service. "Just what the doctor ordered," I said to Rue. She had her head propped up on one arm while she shoveled food in with the other. She didn't bother answering. We lingered for a few minutes after the meal, letting the feeling of contentment suffuse us before our return trip. It was raining, inevitably, and though we didn't have far to go, we'd be well and truly soaked by the time we got back. But all we had to do was crawl into bed. No alarms, no schedules, nothing that had to be accomplished the following day. Nowhere we had to be besides right where we woke up. Now that is paradise. At the last minute, I thought about supplies for the night. "Do you have any bottled water we could buy?" I asked the waitress. "No, sorry, no bottled water left," she replied. "Okay, no worries." At the time, I thought nothing of it. After all, our hostel sold water and was probably more polite to buy it from them than to walk in with it. So we paid our bill and left, rejoicing in how easy it was to find food here, and how easy everything was going to be from now on. "I already love it here," I told Rue. Surviving China was a test, and Laos was going to be our reward. Liberty's owners, Min, named for Ho Chi Minh, and his sister Nang, gave us such an enthusiastic welcome back that we felt like old friends. "Tomorrow you want to go to the waterfall?" Min asked. Maybe, I told him. It sounded more respectful than the truth, which was bollocks to the waterfall. I'm not getting out of bed tomorrow. I bought 2 big bottles of cold water from the fridge right outside our door, and we bid our hosts good night. As we snuggled into our blankets, utterly exhausted but happy with it, I shared my positive vibes with Rue. Good things are going to happen to us now. I can feel it. Not long after midnight, I woke up. I could feel something now, all right, and it was anything but good. I leapt out of bed and bolted to the bathroom, making it just in time. A torrent of poo blasted out of me with such violence it must have woken everyone in the building. Whoa! Those night buses really did a number on me. Something about disrupted sleep cycles combined with junk food, weird food, and not enough of either. My guts often punished me for treating them so carelessly. I thought no more of it, until Rue bolted for the bathroom an hour later with equally explosive results. Well, that's the last bit of China out of our systems, I joked, literally. And we fell into the deep sleep of those who really, really need it. By morning, we had to admit that we had a problem. It was called Tony shit the bed. Actually, we had 2 problems. The second was called Tony shit the floor. I won't go into the state of the bathroom. Let's just say it was in need of a damn good hosing down. Unfortunately, neither of us felt strong enough to even contemplate such a task. It was all we could do to drag ourselves out of bed each time we felt a new wave coming. It was the same for both of us, a sudden clenching of the stomach, ominous sounds of the kind no healthy digestive tract should be making, immediately followed by the certain knowledge that another eruption was imminent. "Oh God, Tony, it's happening again! I've got to go!" She crawled back to bed afterwards, and we lay there comparing notes. "I can hardly move," I admitted. "I feel so weak." "I'm the same," Rue said. "I can hardly lift my head up. I'm so tired." "Oh no, I've got to go!" And it was my turn to make the 2-metre dash. On the one hand, I was grateful for the compact size of the room. Having so little floor space between bed and the toilet meant a lot less chance of me voiding my bowels all over it. Again. But being so small, the room filled fairly rapidly with a variety of pungent aromas. Our wet, stinking clothes, the sweat of our now feverish bodies, and the all-pervading odour of the toilet. How were we so ill? I couldn't understand it. Must have been the food last night, Rue said. We didn't eat anything dodgy on the bus. We didn't get the chance. But the food was so good, and all we had to drink was... Realisation hit us both at the same time. "Water," I finished. "No bottled water left," Rue repeated. "So what had they been serving us?" "Sewage water, with the side order of plague, if how we felt was anything to go by." Lunchtime came and went. We felt no better, dozing in between bathroom visits and persuading each other to drink as much water as we could. It kind of goes without saying that all forms of naughtiness were off the cards. "I'm sorry," Rue said. "Hopefully we'll feel better by tomorrow." I hope so too. Tomorrow was my birthday. And, coincidentally, our 2nd wedding anniversary. "At least we'll get to spend the whole day in bed," she joked. I had to chuckle. Ironically, my first thought when we'd been shown into the room directly adjacent to the reception was it would be awkward for sex. Not being the most soundproof of buildings at the best of times, we'd have to make an effort to keep the noise down. Now, sex was about as likely as being mugged by a unicorn, and all I could think of instead was that Min and Nang had been sitting there all morning listening to us violently abusing their toilets every 10 minutes since 6 a.m. So it was with more than a hint of reluctance that I crept out of our room and over to the reception desk, a journey of about 3 metres. I had one burning question in my mind. Excuse me, I don't suppose you got any more toilet paper?" On our 2nd night in the country, neither of us were capable of going out for dinner. Facing further weakening, having involuntarily rid ourselves of every scrap of nutrition we'd been able to consume, I pulled my shit together, not literally this time, and ventured out. I could only face going as far as the restaurant we'd eaten the night before. It was the only place I knew, and the closest. Rue was less than thrilled when I announced I would try to reach the Poison Cafe, but we didn't have a lot of options. I made my way there as fast as I could, horribly aware that I was on a time limit. I half expected the cafe to be deserted, having been identified as ground zero for a viral apocalypse. But for everyone there, it was business as normal. I asked for 2 servings of plain chicken and rice and managed to muster a snigger when I saw it on the menu. Survival rice, they called it. Obviously, they'd encountered this situation before, which was hardly surprising, given they were the cause of it. I sprawled on a beanbag while they cooked my order and eyed the waitress bringing round glasses of water on a tray. When she approached me, I waved her off, but then couldn't help asking, "Is that tap water?" "Yes," she said brightly, like I'd just won a prize. "I'll pass, thanks." She placed a glass in front of each, glass each in front of a couple sitting at a table in front of me. "Don't drink that," I warned them. "Really?" the bloke asked in a strong Scottish accent. "See what I look like?" He narrowed his eyes, then nodded. "This is what you'll look like tomorrow night if you drink that water." Oh, shit. And they both pushed their glasses away. Shit is right, I thought. I barely made it back to the guest house before my next episode. I was shaking when I emerged from the bathroom. "This is ridiculous," I said to no one in particular. Rue was forcing the rice down, barely able to sit up for it. I ate mine half-heartedly, then made yet another foray back out into reception. Min was on duty and gave me a sympathetic smile. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting better," I lied, pulling 2 big bottles of water from the fridge. "Can I put these on my bill?" "Of course," he scribbled a note in his desk diary. "So, you want to go to the waterfall tomorrow? It's very beautiful." Not really, sorry." Nang had thoughtfully provided a fresh stack of towels, which she'd left outside our door. I couldn't blame her for not disturbing us. I was quite relieved I hadn't had to let her into the room. She'd also left some other essential supplies, which I tossed straight over to Rue. "More toilet roll! Thank God for that. I was afraid it was going to be my turn to ask." "Think of it as an anniversary gift," I told her. "At least I know you'll use it." We did recover. But I won't go on quite so much about that. We've had enough of that, I think.
We did lose a lot of weight.
We were skinnier than we've ever been after a week of that. Narrowly avoid hospitalisation.
We kept thinking, oh, we'll go to the hospital if we need to.
Yeah.
And
Every night we said we'd go to the hospital if we were still as bad the next morning. And the next morning we didn't have the strength to go to the hospital. Dear. Yes. So, delicate matters. We'd been saving Siem Reap, the top destination in Cambodia, because we wanted to end our trip with a blast. Most tourists don't bother going anywhere else in Cambodia, but then most tourists are on a strict time limit. Our last destination, Ban Lung, had been cheap and relaxing and was the perfect advertisement for travelling slow. We hadn't exactly immersed ourselves in local culture, but we'd explored the town and made a couple of forays into the surrounding countryside. We'd also spent a lot of time listening to the rain rattling on the roof of our bungalow, appreciating the tranquility of the natural environment, and snuggling. Now I'd caught up on my journaling, my eye had mostly healed, and Rue still hadn't started sorting out her orangutan pictures. I had a feeling that they'd be with us for the long haul. We were squelching through the mud on our way back from the market when Rue's eagle eyes picked out something on the ground. "Tony, quick!" I looked down and couldn't believe it. Right between her feet, torn and filthy and half disintegrated, was a $100 US bill. Crouching down, I very gingerly extracted the note. It was in terrible shape, possibly beyond saving, but if there was any chance at all, we had to try. Surely fate had planted this in our path as a reward for all our struggles, or perhaps an apology. Back at the bungalow, Rue went to work. She blotted the mud and water off the fragile paper and used a Q-tip to gently unfold all the jagged edges. There were several holes ripped in the bill and most of one edge was missing. It was stained and crumpled, but still. I did a bit of Googling and found all sorts of urban myths that such notes could be returned to the US Mint for replacement, or that it was still legal tender if more than half of it remained intact. There was nothing we could do about it in Cambodia. People entering the country are advised to bring pristine notes for fear imperfect currency will be rejected. But once we got home, I'd figured out what to do. And then we'd have a party. Ruth sandwiched our windfall between several sheets of toilet paper and pressed it in my journal. We pulled the note out periodically over the next few weeks, re-examining the damage and trying different methods of cleaning it, debating whether or not it would pass muster. I spent more than a few hours researching the legalities and made a list of our options. Then Ruth suggested checking for security features, so I looked for those too. The note had its watermark all right, and there may or may not have been a special thread embedded in it. I was carefully turning the note back and forth in the light, trying to see if any part of it was glowing, when I spotted something a little more obvious. "Oh shit! Rue, it's fake!" "No!" She leapt up and came to look. "What's wrong with it? How can you tell?" "Well, you can see the watermark here, which is fine," I explained. "Yes, but when you turn it over..." "Yes, what is it?" I pointed. "Oh, bloody hell!" On the back, where it should have said United States of America, across the top, in exactly the same typeface, it actually said Abode of the Dead Bank. I'm no expert, I admitted, but that might give the game away. The bus to Siam Reap was actually 2 buses. No one had told us this when we booked it, but few things surprised us anymore. What was a tad concerning was the second bus, which we'd been told we were getting onto when it was ready to leave, listed its destination as Hanoi in Vietnam. You really don't want to end up back in Hanoi, I said to the lady in the ticket shack. No, he's okay. Go Siam Reap, she replied. Siam Reap, really? Yes. We had no choice but to trust her, so we looked around for something to occupy us for the next hour or 2. Hey, you know where we are? Asked Rue. Middle of nowhere? No, look, that lady at the food stall. See what she's cooking? She's frying tarantulas. This is... She swiped through the pages of Lonely Planet Cambodia on her tablet. This is skuon. It all made sense now. Spider eating had supposedly started as an act of desperation. The villagers near Skuon had suffered badly during the rule of Khmer Rouge, and widespread food shortage had forced them to look for other options. It's probably a mark of how extreme their hunger was that they even considered eating tarantulas. For starters, they had to catch the bloody things, and then defang them without dying. Cambodian tarantulas are roughly the size of an adult human's palm, and to see one in the wild, well, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was going to eat you. As spiders go, they are the stuff of nightmares, and that's coming from a guy who's lived in Australia for the last 2 years. But after years of famine ended, the villagers of Skuon had discovered quite an appetite for the spiders, as had people in other parts of the country, who now made regular visits to this tiny outpost to stock up. Even I had to admit, the spiders didn't look all that threatening when deep fried and piled on a serving platter the size of a dustbin lid. There must have been hundreds of them, all slightly shriveled but otherwise intact. The old lady who ran the stall was doing a roaring trade, selling them by the bagful to locals on scooters. And no wonder. She was offering an outrageous bargain. 3 spiders for 50 cents. At that price, it was hard to turn her down. Specifically, it was hard to turn down the challenge, as I'd boasted to Rue that I would eat anything, spiders included. Hell, after Mongolian 5-organ soup, how bad could it really be? Rue started filming me as I took my prize to a plastic picnic table. She was hoping to capture the squeals of disgust and possibly retching, whereas I was determined to take this thing like a man, in my mouth. Now, if you've seen a spider's legs lately, you might have noticed that there's not a lot of meat on them. I pulled one off and studied it, wondering what the next step was. I mean, I was struggling to find anything edible at all in the meal I had in front of me. Maybe you suck out the meat like you do with crabs, I mused. I tried. I failed. So if you don't suck out the meat like you do on crabs, I confirmed, in the end, I just stuffed the legs in whole, crunching them up as best I could. What does it taste like? Rue asked from behind her camera lens. I thought about my response for a second, rolling the mixture around in my mouth. Fingernails and soy sauce, I admitted. Rolling it around in my mouth hadn't been the wisest of moves. I cracked the chest cavity open, but found it hollow. Whatever substance had been in there, it must have oozed out during the cooking process. I took a nibble anyway and was rewarded with crispy shards of toughened carapace. They tasted about as good as they sound, which is to say not great. The soy sauce was overpowering any natural spidery flavour, which is a shame, as I can't stand soy sauce. I'd almost rather have eaten it raw. Not that I've actually found much to eat so far. No wonder the locals buy them by the bagful, I commented. Now I was faced with a dilemma. In my fingers I held the spider's abdomen, which is a polite way of saying the arse end of the beast. I dimly recalled reading something about this, but I couldn't quite remember if the recommendation was to eat the abdomen or not. Might as well give it a go, I thought. After all, I paid 20 cents for this. I held the spider's bum up to my mouth, steeling myself for the inevitable explosion of nastiness within, but just as I made ready to stuff it into my gob, I gave it a gentle squeeze. A bubble of brown goo welled up from within the thing, dribbling out onto the table. It was a substance so unspeakably foul that my mind was made up instantly. Yeah, I'm guessing you don't eat this part. It was a narrow escape. Later research revealed this rather poetic description. The abdomen contains a brown paste consisting of organs, possibly eggs, and excrement. Apparently, some people call it a delicacy. As for what other people call those people, I probably shouldn't say. So all in all, not the most satisfying of snacks. Not inedible, and had I been dying of starvation in a remote jungle village, well, maybe I'd have munched those little buggers like they were M&Ms. But as a delicacy, let's just say I'm glad I didn't blow the whole 50 cents. A phrase I use a lot is when in Rome, and I'm delighted to say that I've finally found the exception that proves this rule. When in Scuon, do not do as the locals do. Instead, point and laugh at the poor fools who are doing as the locals do. It really is more entertaining to watch people trying to eat tarantulas than it is trying to eat one yourself. Trust me. The worst part, I said to Rue afterwards, is the leg hair. It's all stuck in my teeth. What? Ew! You're telling me they didn't take the fur off it before they cooked it? Of course not. How could they? And that was a hairy little son of a bitch. No wonder you didn't enjoy it. No one likes eating hair, even if it is deep fried. You should go back and demand one that's been de-haired. Well, I could try, but that lady didn't speak much English, and oddly enough, I don't know the Cambodian for please shave my spider. How are we doing for time, my love?
It's 27 past 2.
Oh, so it's not too bad.
So gross.
Read little bits. We'll read a happier one.
Yeah, no more gross bits.
City of Stone. On our first morning in Siem Reap, I woke up already grinning. This was a day that could well change my life forever. I was going to do something I'd been wanting to do since I was 10. Rue was so excited she was bouncing around the room. Yay! She said, wrapping me in a bear hug. We're going to feed the squirrels! Yes, love. Although I feel you might be missing the point a little. This was the day around which the entire trip had been built, at least for me. Today we will be exploring the most impressive section of the 900-year-old temple complex of Angkor Wat, where apparently there lived a large population of mischievous squirrels who'd become expert picnic thieves. Rue had become obsessed with feeding them ever since she'd read about it in Lonely Planet. That guidebook had a lot to answer for. We rented bicycles from a shop in town, preferring to be our own bosses for the day, instead of being shepherded round by a tuk-tuk driver. It was an appropriate start to our adventure. Just riding out of the city felt daring. As swarms of scooters and tuk-tuks zipped by on both sides, it was exhilarating to be part of the flow. And a bit scary too. There obviously hadn't been a watch out for cyclists campaign here recently. One long straight road led directly through the forest from Siem Reap to Angkor, passing a ticket booth the size of a bus station. It pretty much would be a bus station in peak season, if the vast coach waiting area was anything to judge by. 2 million people came through here every year, and it was the only legal place to buy entrance tickets for the temples. Queuing up behind a dozen international tour groups would have been a nightmare. Yet again, we were glad of our timing. Cambodia has a hot, wet season, and we were smack bang in the middle of it. The lack of crowds was the most obvious benefit, but the major drawback was equally obvious. In every single photo we took, our clothes were soaking with sweat. Having paid for 3-day passes to the Angkor Archaeological Park, we cycled on. 20 minutes later, we emerged from the tunnel of trees to be rewarded with our first sight of Angkor Wat. It was majestic. The temple's towers rose spectacularly above the surrounding forest, beyond a moat so vast it was hard to believe it was artificial. We followed the outline of the perfectly rectangular island, turning a corner towards the main gate. Here lay a chaos of motorbikes and tourists, a fraction of what it would have been a few months ago, but still an unplanned, swirling melee. A wide stone causeway crossed the moat, leading to possibly the most photographed gatehouse on the planet. A shiver ran down my spine as I recognised the entrance to Angkor Wat. But we didn't stop. We rode on because we had bigger fish to fry. You see, the archaeological park contains over 1,000 temples. Many of them are nameless piles of rubble, but over 50 are full-size structures with names like Angkor Thom, Angkor Bob and Angkor Freddy. Okay, I might have made the last two up. But the point is that the most famous one is not necessarily the most impressive. We decided to spend our first day exploring Angkor Thom, a walled city almost 2 miles square which contained most of the best preserved temples in the area. My theory was that nothing could overshadow Angkor Wat itself, but if we saw it first, everything else in the region might seem kind of naff by comparison. So, on we pedalled, around that enormous moat. We were gaining a real appreciation of its scale, if only because our arses were going numb from being in the saddle. How much money did we save with bikes? Rue panted behind me. About $5, I called back, but bikes are environmentally friendly. I didn't hear what she said next, but I don't think it was very complimentary. Eventually, we crossed a bridge flanked by statues of Hindu gods and passed through a gateway held up by chunky timber braces and left our bikes chained to a railing inside. From here we scrambled up a grassy slope to the top of Angkor Thom's 8-metre high walls and stood in another world. Trees grew atop the wall, forming a secluded walkway far from the main tourist areas. Bordered by a moat of its own, the temple complex was more than 5 times the size of its world-famous cousin. Inevitably, we decided to do things a bit differently. Walking around the walls wasn't a common activity for tourists, as most of the amazing ruins were in the middle of the compound. Within a few minutes' walk of the gate, we found ourselves completely alone, surrounded by clouds of butterflies, and we settled down to eat our picnic. "Save some for the squirrels," Rue reminded me. We played around in the ruins of a corner tower before continuing around the wall to a seldom-used gate at the next cardinal point. Then we climbed back down, succumbing at last to the lure of the temples. They did not disappoint. From this direction, the first thing we came to was the Bafwan. Reached by a raised causeway of its own, the Bafwan is a colossal 3-tiered stone pedestal 100 metres square. To stand in front of it is to be utterly humbled. Were it not missing its central tower, it would be taller than the Statue of Liberty. Restoration had only been completed 2 years ago, having taken 51 years in total. It must have been the ultimate facepalm moment. After spending 8 years completely dismantling the temple, the records of where each stone came from were lost during the war with the Khmer Rouge, turning it into the world's biggest jigsaw puzzle. Temples were everywhere. No matter which direction we walked in, we found gateways, walls, steps, shrines. All were beautifully carved, or would have been a few centuries ago, and all were ruined to a greater or lesser degree. Trees were everywhere too, not caring one whit if they grew through an ornate stone window frame, split apart a stone lintel, or collapsed the roof onto themselves. It gave the whole place a mysterious, undiscovered feeling. Amazing, really, considering it's one of the most visited tourist attractions in the world. It had a size in its favour, of course. I'd made fun of Beijing's Forbidden City, suggesting the Ming emperors had some kind of compensation issues that caused them to build palaces the size of small towns. Angkor Thom was on another level. There was even room to fit 12 Forbidden Cities and still have 60 acres left over for a vegetable garden. In this vast gulf of space, thousands of tourists were easily swallowed up. There were times where we had not just a temple to ourselves, but the surrounding landscape as far as we could see. Even in peak season, where visitors thronged the most important monuments, there would be pockets of quiet and seclusion for anyone seeking them. And it goes without saying, there'd be a temple in them. We roamed the ruins until our feet ached, crossing a wide paved terrace edged with dozens of identical elephant sculptures, climbing down to examine an elaborately carved wall recently discovered hidden behind another elaborately carved wall, and posed for photos with all of it. In the near distance we could see many more towers, but we decided against heading over to them. They're massive, Rue pointed out, so they look closer than they are. It'll take us half an hour to walk over there. Instead, we worked our way to the centre of the complex, towards a colossal edifice that's been looming over us all day. This was the Bayon, the largest structure at Angkor Thom, a titanic 3-level ziggurat towering 47 metres above the surrounding landscape. Don't know how big that is in feet. Not far off 150, I think.
Whoa.
From a distance, it looked gnarly and knobbly, owing to the stupendous amount of raised detailing on the stonework. Most famous of all are the giant faces, 216 of them that grace roughly half the postcards in the entire country. We climbed the ridiculously steep steps from level to level, eyeing great piles of stone still waiting to be sorted and catalogued. There was no set end date for this restoration. It would quite simply never be fully complete. The constant presence of tourists is both too dangerous and yet too financially beneficial to allow much work to be done. Standing at the top, beneath the benevolent stone smiles of the corner towers, I was moved almost to tears by the beauty of the place. Such a powerful, awe-inspiring monument from a civilization long lost. I felt a sudden upwelling of respect for its builders and a sense of fascination with their mysterious culture. Also worth noting, the view was incredible. We must have been suffering from heat stroke when we decided to ride the long way home. There were plenty of other temples to see in the surrounding countryside, and unfortunately most of them were marked on our map. This resulted in an extended excursion, cycling past more piles of 11th century religious rubble than was strictly necessary. We stopped for a breather at one of the grandest, Taprom, which had been used as a set in the movie Tomb Raider. It was an eerie place, completely reclaimed by the jungle. The ancient stone buildings were being strangled by roots as thick as my waist. Huge trees grew from rooftops. Vines and creepers tangled the fallen blocks, and every surface was coated in fuzzy green moss. It was like a fairy castle or an elven stronghold, but one that had long since been destroyed, leaving only ghosts and jungle plants to fight over the ruins. We stayed for as long as we could, but got chased out by a security guard just before sunset. We'd already given him the slip a couple of times, and when he cornered us again, we decided he'd earned his keep. This was a place so magical, so creepy and ethereal, we knew we'd be coming back. Night fell on the ride home, which made us wish we had lights on our bikes. In keeping with most forests, there weren't a lot of street lights. Well, none, to be precise, and we were seriously relieved when we broke free of the trees and sighted Angkor Wat. From there, we followed the stream of traffic around the moat and turned back towards Siam Reap. Tuk-tuks buffeted us as they shot past, carrying tourists who'd lingered to watch the sunset at Phnom Bakheng. We gripped our handlebars tightly and pedalled on. Just ahead of us, we noticed an Eastern European couple of similar age, also on bikes. He was cycling for all he was worth, and cycling one-handed, because his other hand was on her bike, pushing her along. From the periodic shrieks she emitted, we could only assume that she couldn't ride a bike, and that without his support she'd be under the wheels of the next tuk-tuk. "Look," I called back to Rue, "I bet they're glad they saved $5. We rode straight back to the hotel, because knowing we'd be buying a 3-day Angkor pass, we'd paid to keep the bikes for 3 days as well. Bugger. We'd cycled nearly 14 miles, walked another 6. Added to the many hundreds of steps we'd climbed, and the sheer volume of sweat we'd pumped out, and the number of calories burnt by our brains going, "What?" We'd had a pretty heavy day. We collapsed into bed, rising only to answer the door when the hotel manager brought us our dinner. Room service in Cambodia, it turns out, is dangerously affordable. So affordable, in fact, that the next day we did nothing else. As we lay there, sated and exhausted, my mind spun with images of everything we'd seen. I knew these pictures would stay with me forever. I rolled over to look at Rue. My only regret, I told her, is that I didn't bring my mum to see it. She'd have gone absolutely mental. "We'll have to bring her back then. We'll have to come back then and bring her with us," Rue said. "Now that is a great idea." We were silent for a while, both picturing that future. Then Rue rolled to face me. "You'll know what my only regret is?" she asked. "What?" "No squirrels!" And the end?
22.
All right.
You've got time for one more.
Epilogue. We arrived back in Perth at 7:30 a.m. on the 18th of September 2013.
That's a long time ago. Jeez. Time what?
Getting old. We'd been away for almost exactly 6 months. Including airport stopovers, we'd visited 8 countries and travelled a fraction under 20,000 miles. For only 5,000 more, we could have circumnavigated the globe. We'd seen 19 UNESCO World Heritage Sites and used 9 different currencies, 3 of which I still had banknotes in, only to discover later that they're closed currencies and can't be exchanged outside their respective countries, which was a bit of a bugger. And we'd spent a little over $16,000 of our $9,000 budget. Rue's dad picked us up from the airport and drove us back to the family home. The first thing we did was eat, emptying his cupboards of all the comfort food we'd missed so much. The second thing we did was sleep, and we did a lot of it. The third thing we did was unpack. 2 great piles formed rapidly on the floor of the games room. One of clothes in desperate need of washing, and one of clothes so far beyond washing that they were destined for the bin. Oh, and there was a third, much smaller pile. This was the sewing pile, or as Rue put it, stick anything that your balls hang out of in here. Next, Rue pulled out all the presents she'd bought for her sisters. They were almost entirely scarves. I carefully removed and unwrapped the more illicit souvenirs I'd collected, a tiny piece each of the Great Wall of China, Huashang's interminable steps, and the majestic Bayon of Angkor Wat. I know, I'm so naughty. But other than books, I don't collect much. If I ever own a house one day, I shall display these ancient treasures proudly, alongside my piece of Hadrian's Wall, and my piece of the Berlin Wall, and a Roman mosaic tile from Jerash in Jordan, and a carved fragment of rock from Petra. Oh, and a piece of the limestone casing from the Great Pyramid at Giza, which I was told afterwards you could be shot for taking. Who knew? Out came all our technology, most of which had survived remarkably unscathed. Man of the Match award went to the SteriPen, which I'd used almost every night of the trip. I'd replaced the batteries twice, and it had saved us from contributing somewhere between 200 and 300 plastic water bottles to landfill sites around Asia. Next, I removed the mosquito net, which had been used only once at Mulu National Park in Borneo. It looked like it had been used considerably more often, and for something considerably more heinous than keeping out insects. It went straight in the bin. Last but not least, I felt around in the bottom of my bag, quite puzzled as to why it still weighed so much. Then, with a gasp of revelation, I withdrew around 2 kilos of scrunched up plastic. Vince, the inflatable velociraptor, who hadn't seen the light of day since we'd squashed him into my rucksack over 6 months ago. You took the velociraptor, Rue said, sounding surprised. Well, it was your idea. We're going to take photos of him everywhere. You said it'd be hilarious. She gave an exaggerated sigh. Yes, but I wasn't serious. The following morning, Rue's dad gave us a stack of posts to open, as we'd had everything diverted to his house. Predictably, there was enough junk mail to fill a bathtub, and very little of consequence. Except, at the bottom of the stack, I discovered a more official-looking letter. I opened it, recognising the seal of the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, and as I read the text, my blood ran cold. Readers of my previous books might remember that shortly after Rue and I got married, I applied for a permanent residency visa in Australia. Emigrating to Australia is getting harder and harder, and I've been lucky. Pretty much the only way a penniless, unskilled backpacker like me has a chance these days is getting hitched to a native. The application process had been complicated and horrendously expensive. Despite having been together for over 5 years, Rue and I had struggled when it came to proving our relationship. Our vagabondish ways left little in the way of a paper trail, and we had no mortgage, no car loans, no life insurance, no way to prove our love for each other beyond sending them a graphic video. The result was a probationary period. For 2 years, I would have the right to live and work in Australia, and if Rue and I were still together at the end of that, the visa would become permanent. That was the subject of the letter. My probationary status was now up for review. Or rather, it had been. This letter was inviting me to submit proof that my relationship to Rue was still ongoing. The decision about whether or not to allow me permanent residence in Australia would be based solely on the documents I supplied to them. And the deadline for them to receive these documents had expired 2 months ago. I dropped the letter on the kitchen bench and stared at it in horror. My stomach was clenching in a way I hadn't felt since Luang Prabang. I was either going to cry, pass out, or shit myself. Rue caught the look on my face and read the letter. Oh, she said. That's not good. No, is all I could manage to say. Not good at all. I don't react well to stress. That's why I picked the stress-free life of a happy-go-lucky traveller. It hadn't turned out quite like that, but I figured that was mostly my fault. Now, however, we were back in the real world, and already it was going tits up. All I could think was that at any moment another letter would arrive informing me that I had 24 hours to leave the country. If my partner visa was refused, with no tourist visa and no other way of legally remaining in Australia, deportation was the inevitable conclusion. I was starting to panic. Rue rescued me, as she so often does. She got me sitting down, glass of wine in hand, while we calmly talked through our options. A flurry of phone calls to different government departments followed, eventually resulting in a conversation with someone who actually worked in immigration. The trouble is, he explained, there is a way to get an extension on the deadline, but even if you had applied for it and been granted the extension, you'd still have missed it. So what do I do? It's up to the case officers, I'm afraid. The only thing you can do is gather all the forms and documents supporting your application, plus anything which explains why you missed the deadline, and overnight courier it to Brisbane. And there's absolutely nothing else? That depends. Are you a religious man? It took most of the day to gather and annotate the evidence, which I've been collecting since moving to Australia 2 years ago. I wrote a lengthy apology to include with the parcel and sent it off just minutes before the post office closed. Now, like the man suggested, there was nothing else to do but pray. I did think of one possibility, though, and fired off a carefully worded email to the migration officer who'd vetted my initial application. The ominously named Mr. Stern was anything but, and he'd guided me through several complications in the early stages. His office was in London, but he was the closest thing I had to an ally in the field. A day later, his response came back. He couldn't promise anything, but he'd see what he could do. It was the first glimmer of hope, a single ray of light at the end of the tunnel. I could only hope it wasn't the headlamp of an oncoming train. That one slight issue aside, our homecoming had been very welcome. I always suffer a burst of depression at the end of a big trip, but I've long since figured out how to manage it. Start planning the next trip ASAP. As we reacclimatised to life in Australia, Rue and I tossed around ideas for travelling South America, Europe, even the US, which we both visited but had never really had the chance to explore. But America, like most of Europe, is a staggeringly expensive proposition when compared to Asia. It would be quite a while before our finances were back to a level we could even consider something like that. Actually, our finances were a bit of a problem. I've been using the money from my book sales to prop up our dwindling travel fund, with the result being we'd arrived back with almost nothing. After the splendid freedom of our adventures, Rue couldn't face going back to her last job, cleaning toilets for the mentally disabled. I can't say I blamed her. So I promised to work extra hard on my next book and convinced her that it would turn us into millionaires. In the meantime, all we had to do was live cheap and keep our fingers crossed. One way of achieving this, which had been suggested to me several times over the years, was house sitting. I'd always wanted to try it, but the time had never been quite right. Now it was, so I signed up to a website called Trusted House Sitters, which had several adverts requesting volunteers in Perth. Figuring that the vast majority of advertisers wanted house sitters to look after their pets, I put Rue's profession down as animal carer. That's what she'd been before I came along and completely derailed her career. And with only a slight hesitation, I listed myself as a travel writer. Are you sure that's wise? Rue asked. Well, it's our only source of income at the moment. I might as well start owning up to it. The hardest part, filling out the application form, was finding a photo the two of us could be described as sensible. I considered using one of our wedding photos until Rue pointed out the unsightly bulge caused by me wearing trousers 2 sizes too small. In my defence, it was a medieval theme, and the tight trousers had been entirely Rue's idea. Eventually, I trawled through the pictures on Rue's big camera, finding one of us both draped around a stone head in Angkor Wat. I wrote a cheerful introduction to us, mentioning that we loved to travel, but leaving out the fact that disaster seems to follow in our wake. To top it all off, we even had a suitable reference. Once upon a time, we'd scored an unofficial house sit whilst visiting my sister Jill in New Zealand. An elderly couple she knew were going on holiday, and they had an equally elderly cat that they were very attached to, and asked if we would stay in their house to help him keep company while they were gone. It was a win-win situation. We got a free stay in the kind of comfy, well-equipped house we'd never have been able to rent, and they could enjoy their holiday, safe in the knowledge that a pair of devoted animal lovers were taking good care of their precious baby. It hadn't been the most successful of gigs. The cat had died, for starters. Fortunately for us, the beloved Moggy had expired the day before we were due to move in. It had been taking more pills, potions and remedies than most octogenarians, and we'd been given extensive notes on the dosage and timing of every medication. Not all of it was to be taken orally. The couple went on their holiday anyway, having already paid for it, but it was a tearful goodbye as they left the house. Rue and I stared at each other in shocked silence as the sound of their car faded into the distance. I looked out the window to make sure they were gone, then gave Rue a hug. I never thought I'd say this, but thank God that cat is dead. A smile of relief flickered across Rue's face. Yeah, imagine if he'd struggled on for one more day. I shuddered at the thought of disaster so narrowly avoided. And on the upside, I don't have to spend the next week chasing the cat around the house with one finger inside a rubber glove. Dead pets aside, house sitting was the perfect job for us. We both had plenty of experience owning and working with animals, and we were tidy and respectful people, and we both had very trustworthy faces. Seriously, we practised them in the mirror. As most of the contact was by email, I had the opportunity to write sensitive and thoughtful messages aimed at convincing pet owners we were the ones they needed, and before I sent them, Rue went through and cut out any swearing and or references to my testicles. Good job she doesn't do that to my books, eh? And have a time for the end, or are we?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, can do.
Sitting dogs. Our first house sit was for a gorgeous golden retriever called Brittany. Well, more specifically, it was for her owners, who had a luxurious family home in Perth's southern suburbs. We couldn't believe we got to stay in such an amazing place for free. Not only did they have a heated swimming pool in the back garden, they had not one but 2 different robots to clean it. There was a large home office. I set up my tiny, rather battered laptop with its taped-up power supply in between 2 wall-mounted iMacs that looked so mind-bendingly expensive I didn't even dare touch them. The office had a daybed, which was perfect for resting my eyes while I wrestled with a story, and it was round the corner from the fridge, which the owners had left thoughtfully well stocked with wine. I locked myself in, to the office, not the fridge, only emerging for food and dog walking duties, and I wrote all day and late into every night. It's my own fault. You'd think I'd have learned to type with more than 2 fingers by now. Perhaps because of my night owl tendencies, the early morning sales calls Rue started getting on a mobile were becoming a real pain. One morning when it rang just after 6 a.m, she sat up cursing and groped for it in the darkness. "This number is not on the do not call register," she mumbled into the phone. "And we don't want to buy anything, so fuck off." "Sales call," I groaned. "Bloody Indian call centre," she muttered, and was asleep again in seconds. So when the phone rang again less than a minute later, she was ready to hit the roof. "I'll get it," I said. "I might as well get up and take the dog out while I'm at it." I put on my best disgruntled tone when I answered the phone. "Hello? What do you want?" "Mr. Slater," came the voice, with a thick Indian accent. "Yes." "Please do not hang up, Mr. Slater." "Why?" "Mr. Slater, this is Mr. Singh from the Department of Immigration." "Oh." "Yes, Mr. Slater. I believe I was just speaking to your wife." Oh, yeah, terribly sorry. We've been getting a lot of sales calls. This is not a sales call, Mr. Slater. No, sorry. This call is about permanent residency in Australia. Is that a product you would be interested in, Mr. Slater? That was my introduction to the case officer who would be handling my residency application from now on. He went on to inform me that, owing to intervention on my behalf from London, I was being given a second chance to have my claim assessed. He needed me to organise police record checks for both of us and to print, fill out, scan in and email back a form which explained why I'd changed my passport since the original application. It wasn't great news, but it was hopeful. So long as they were prepared to review the evidence I'd sent them, it should be a foregone conclusion. The very fact that they were communicating with me and asking for more paperwork gave me reason to believe they were still considering my application. And that's all I could ask for. When I got a second call a week later, this time from a lady, I was trembling in anticipation. With good reason, as it turned out. There's been a problem with your application, she told me. There have been allegations that your marriage is not genuine and that you're attempting to gain residency in Australia through fraudulent means. I felt like I'd been doused in a bucket of ice water. What? But how? Who? I am not at liberty to disclose that information, other than to say that the allegation was made by an Australian citizen living in Vietnam. I'm afraid we have to take these claims very seriously and have opened an investigation. Suddenly, understanding flickered through my shock-shrouded brain. Vietnam, the only place in the world, as far as I knew, where I had an enemy. You have got to be kidding me. I'm sorry, what was that, Mr. Slater? So I explained to her everything that had happened to us in Hanoi. I told her about our boat trip complaint, about the subsequent grilling, which was now on YouTube, about the pornographic website created just to get back at me, and then listed the organisations I contacted to report the perpetrator. She said she'd look into it. A few days later, having read all the websites, watched the videos, and reassessed my evidence, the decision was made in my favour. My palms dripped with sweat as I received the call, and I couldn't help asking what would happen to the person who'd told such blatant lies about me. I'm not at liberty to say, came the expected response, but making a false statement to immigration is considered a federal offence here. Ah, well, thank you very much. Have a nice day, Mr. Slater. I will now. A few days later, I was sitting in my home office working on the book when an email came through. Congratulations! Welcome to Australia, it began, which I took as a good sign. My application had been successful. I was now allowed to work, rest and play indefinitely in Australia, and in New Zealand too, should the mood take me. After everything I'd gone through to get this far, it felt like a major victory. So how did I celebrate? Why, with a glass of wine, of course, and a hug from Rue. And then I carried straight on with the chapter I'd been writing, feeling more than ever that fate had something good in store for me. Rue was my primary editor. She has eagle eyes when it comes to typos, and having spent rather a lot of time with me, she understands what I'm trying to say, even when the text I've written makes no sense at all. She's also very handy when it comes to questions about Australia, specifically the weird-ass animals that inhabit this crazy country. She could tell straight away, for example, which species of spider had chased me around the bathroom the previous night. Those are the ones we kill, she explained, because you really don't want to die on the toilet. My next Aussie question... I'm going to need your help with this one, Rue. My next Aussie question was on marsupials. Rue had popped into the office to bring me a coffee, and I suspect to make sure I hadn't fallen asleep on the daybed. Hey, love, how do you spell numbat? I asked. Suddenly, Rue burst into song.
M says you're nice, you are unique. M says you're marvellous, it's true. B, you are beautiful. A, you're adorable. T, you're terrific and tiny too. You are a number and we love you. Oh yes, very important education.
Thanks for that, I said. You know, NUMBAT would have done. It took 2 long months, with time off over Christmas for an extended pool party, of course, but a few days before we returned Brittany's house to its owners, I completed the first draft of Kamikaze Kangaroos. There was only one real problem. It was rubbish. Or so I thought. It was another month before I dared to release it. Most of that time I spent changing every word in a sentence, only to reread it 15 minutes later and change them all back again. By this point, our luck had changed, and we were living in a dilapidated old house with 3 huge rescue dogs that pretty much filled it. That's the downside of house sitting. You have to take what you can get, and if you don't want to end up on the street. Technically, it was illegal to own more than 2 dogs in that area. Just walk them separately, the owner suggested, which meant I had to go out 4 times a day, because Roo simply wasn't strong enough to restrain any of the dogs. A bull mastiff, a huge German shepherd, and the biggest Dalmatian I'd ever seen. Almost as a passing thought, the owner mentioned to us that all 3 were rescue dogs and all 3 had different behavioural problems. The mastiff, for example, hated wheels and would attack anything that had them, like children on bikes or skateboards, for instance. And feed them all separately, or they'll fight over the food, she told us. That was a long month. Eventually, Roo convinced me to stop farting around with my manuscript. Even if it doesn't take off, she explained, you'll sell a few hundred copies to the die-hard fans, and we could really do with that money. She was speaking from the heart. She'd just helped me pick up enough poo to fill 2 shopping bags from the back garden and was understandably over the whole house-setting lark. So I put the book up on Amazon, hoping for the best but expecting the worst. I've never had much confidence in my writing ability, and to be honest, it still terrifies me when I think of people out there somewhere actually reading my crap. But this time, Ruth's predictions came closest. She's always had far more faith in me than I have, probably more than I deserve. Kamikaze Kangaroos Against All the Odds was doing rather well. When it became the top-selling travel book on both sides of the Atlantic, albeit briefly, I was so blown away that I nearly forgot to take a screenshot. Luckily, Roo had my back on that one too. Look, she stabbed her finger at the laptop screen. Your book is #1 in travel. That officially makes you a bestseller. Wow, cool. You know what else it makes you? No? A travel writer. Ah, yes, good point. So does that mean you'll quit bitching about it? Well, I guess I'll have to. Finally! I sat there for a bit, savouring the heady rush of endorphins. This is what success felt like, I realised. Well, kind of. I mean, I was still flat broke, living in a house so disgusting that Roo stood outside to eat, and we'd be homeless again in a couple of weeks. I was about to be dragged around the neighbourhood by a pair of dogs so powerful it was more like water skiing than walking, only to return and repeat the process with a beast so fearsome looking that most people crossed the road to avoid me. And if there were anyone on roller skates or a scooter, they really needed to. But apart from that, things were looking up. So what's next for my famous travel writer husband, Roo asked. I sighed. First, I better sacrifice a few children to Cerberus, and then I've got about a bajillion emails to answer. Whoa, from readers, what do they say? I don't know, let's see. I brushed the ever-present pile of dog hair from the laptop and clicked on an email. Dear Tony, it said, my husband dealt with cancer for over 2.5 years, prior to October when he passed away. During this time, the only thing that made me laugh was reading about your escapades. So now I'm dealing with the loss of my partner of 56 years. Finding your new book is just what I needed. I sat back stunned. Wow. Roo's at a loss for words too. Are they all like that? No. Most of them are just, hi there, I love your books. If you're ever passing Palm Beach in Florida, come and stay with us. We'll show you some real southern hospitality. That sounds great, she said. We could go to Palm Beach. I think the US is a bit out of our price range. How many of those emails have you got? Oh, millions. Bajillions. Well, thousands at least. How many in reality? About 50. Are they all offering you a place to stay? Well, I don't know. Most of them say something like that. Oh my God. We should totally take them up on those offers. What? Go to America? And visit the fans. Imagine it, all those people who want to meet you and all they have to do is find us a bed or a sofa to crash on, maybe buy us dinner, and in return they get a visit from a real live author. I can see where you're going, but you might be overselling me a bit. I'm not sure any of them really want to meet me. It's just something nice they put in an email because, they know I'll never actually be in Palm Beach. Well, that's their bad luck then, isn't it? It really would be, given what normally happens when we travel. Yes, she said, but that was Asia. Surely that can't follow us to America. What do you think? Should we find out? Hell yeah! Roo danced a little jig before remembering something important. One more thing though, she said, her voice taking on a serious tone. If you're going to be staying in other people's houses, you have got to buy some underwear. I thought long and hard about this. It seemed like a sacrifice I was willing to make. So, it turns out the next adventure is this. I'm coming to see you, whether you want me to or not. And where I go, Roo goes too. And we all know what that means. Be afraid. Be very afraid. And put the kettle on. I'll see you soon. The end for now. And I still occasionally get emails. I don't get tens of thousands of them. Never did get tens of thousands of them, but I get the odd one too. And people who've read Shaved by Spider quite often ask when I'm coming to America. And unfortunately, we've done it. We've already been, and it was an unbelievable trip. It was absolutely mind blowing. We drove. Rue drove. Didn't trust me. With reason. She drove all the way from Los Angeles to New York, where we sold the car and caught the train all the way back again. It was mind bending, and we stayed with so many incredible people, and we swam with manatees, and we paddleboarded, and we visited Coral Castle and the Winchester Mansion, and we went to Vegas, and we trekked. We climbed mountains, and we trekked all kinds of incredible natural parks, and all. It was just insane, but nothing really went wrong. So I got back. I didn't write a book about it. I was like, all I could do really is sort of be really sarcastic about the people that we stayed with, which is a bit mean because
They were so nice.
they were really nice, and they gave us a place to stay. I was like, I'm out. Like I could write a very descriptive book, but I don't think it'd be very funny. So I had a few stabs, and basically all I ended up with was nice, poetic, boring drivel. It's one of those things I often find about other travel books. I can't read them. I just find them boring as batshit, because if you're not there with travel, what's the point? And that's why I wrote my books, because they were adventures that were so crazy, like in Ecuador. I was like, no one's going to even believe that I did this. And the only reason I carried on writing them was because
It kept happening.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, so what's basically happened now is I never did write another travel book fully. As you may know, I wrote the prequel about my trying to become an actor and failing and all that rubbish. But it is way past time that I do. I have been really busy with my new sci-fi business, because I've got to eat. And sci-fi books do pay the bills, but I amazingly actually still sell more travel books than I do with all the sci-fi. So basically, what I've decided to do, I've got believe it or not, four more sci-fi books on the slate, because they're so much quicker and easier to write than travel books, and you don't have to travel for 6 months to write them, which helps. So those are going to be out, amazingly enough, by January, and so January I am starting another travel book. And
Yay! A travel book, a travel book, a travel book, a travel
I
book,
promise.
a travel book, a travel book.
And some of my travel books are really good themes, like the Kamikaze Kangaroos about Australia, That Bear about Ecuador, and Shave My Spider about Asia, and those really, really sell well and do really well. The middle ones, which are a bit more bitty, the wedding one about going to Jordan and travelling around England and then getting married, is a little bit bitty. And the Thailand one, which isn't a Thailand one, it's about renovation and it's about all sorts of other crap and joining the army and then ends up in Thailand. Those two just never sold as well. And I always felt that the reason was because they didn't have a really cohesive theme, which is a bit of a worry, because I was like, if I write this next one, it can't just be all about America for reasons I've talked about. But we did do other things which were a bit weird, because it's us in and around there. And basically, we've now, like, that was 2013, as I said. So we've now lived through a few more years of assorted adventures. So we have enough to string together that I think we can make a book out of.
Yay!
But the danger is it will be bitty like the other ones, like the Thailand and the wedding one, and might not sell because that might not be as popular. So hopefully my writing has evolved a little bit, so that might counter it. So it's a bit. Anyway, luckily I came up with a theme just the other day, as it happens, and you need a theme to stitch them together. And if you can nail a theme, it doesn't have to be a theme that you were thinking about while you're having the adventures. It just needs to be a theme as you look back on the stories that you can sort of slot them into, so it makes sense. It's like, got a progression, there's a question at the beginning, it's answered at the end, and you kind of refer back to it, and it makes the whole thing feel much more satisfying to readers. And I've got a theme for this book, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. So you're going to have to watch this space to find that out. It's a good one. So on that note, I will say thank you very much. Really, really, really appreciate you all sticking with me through hours of waffle over. For me, it's 3 o'clock in the morning on Monday, but for you, it's Sunday afternoons, it's Sunday lunchtimes,
Loads of time.
all over the world. And
hopefully he's brought a bit of happiness to this crazy old world we live in.
Hopefully, yeah, I haven't just wasted all your time for the last, like, I think
and all your internet data.
Yeah, 25 hours of of waffle that you poor buggers have listened to. So sorry for that. I hope you enjoyed some of it.
Yeah. Look after each other and keep yourselves and your family safe.
Take care. It's still a bit dangerous out there these days, so look after yourself, look after each other, be safe as you possibly can.
And drink lots of water.
Yes, she always says that.
I always say that to everyone.
I will think of what other things to do in a future live endeavour, but for now we are going back to being in bed at 3 o'clock in Monday, to which Rue is very gratefully looking forward. So, awesome. See you later, guys. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everything, and have fun, and we'll see you again before.
Love you guys. Thank you. Bye.